some thank you for being joined by some outstanding folks in the field, and I'm really looking forward to their presentation today. I'm going to hand it off to Dr. Frazee so that he can kick off the introductions and the session, and I look forward to hearing from you.
Great, thank you, Andrea. We really appreciate the time. And I am James Frazee. I'm the Chief Academic Technology Officer here at San Diego State University. I began teaching here in 1999 and am responsible for the technologies for teaching at SDSU, both in the virtual realm as well as our built environments in terms of our physical classroom spaces on campus, among other things. I want to go ahead and ask Dr. Hawes and Andriana to introduce themselves. Go right ahead, please.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sean Hawes. I'm the Director of Instructional Technology Services, and we provide a variety of both built and virtual resources for the entire campus, which, as you can imagine, was of high criticality over the last year. So happy to be here sharing these resources with you today. Andriana?
And good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andriana Martinez. I'm a faculty support specialist in instructional technology services, and I provide support for the various ITS initiatives, including this one, and support for our academic technologies.
Wonderful. Let's go right ahead and get going with a question. Andriana is going to serve as our MC of interaction today. It's really important for us to get information from our audience so that we can tailor the talk to make sure we're meeting your needs. So if you can, please just take a minute. And I recommend using your mobile device, cell phone, or if you have a tablet or a laptop, not using the device you're on here, but using preferably your cell phone, and go to that link that you see up at the top, polev.com/SDSU 133. And let us know what you think about this question.
So we'll take a couple of seconds. What is your perception of extended reality? So we see the responses are trickling in. Great, 33% and 67% so far. It's great because you can see everything in real time. About another 15 seconds. Great to see these responses coming in.
And this will really help, in terms of just couching our remarks and thinking about what you all might need. So very helpful. Let's go ahead and keep going. So it looks like, the bulk of folks are in that kind of investigatory stage of the process. Here at with that representing, gosh, almost 90% of us. So I want to just talk a little bit about San Diego State University, a large public research university founded in 1897. We have a student body of about 36,000 students, so it's a large, comprehensive university. The initiative that we've dubbed Virtual Immersive Teaching and Learning, or VITaL, has been in place since 2017. We have the good fortune of having been formally recognized as a research center on campus just recently, earlier this fall, and we've got a lot of excitement around that. I'll say more about that as we proceed. But we're much further along in terms of the use of immersive learning technologies. You see here that we've had 69 courses from all of our academic colleges here in San Diego, from lower division general ed courses to doctoral level seminars, a wide variety of domains. And we've really had an emphasis on sharing what we're learning with the community, like we're doing today. And we've done that through journal articles, through conference presentations like this one, and with some grants that we've been successful in receiving. You'll hear more from Andriana about our involvement with student organizations. That's been absolutely essential. And we'll talk about all the students that have been participating as we move on. So let's keep going. This is a San Diego State spin on a very important quote from Confucius. You know, I think that it's all about immersing students, especially in historically challenging courses where we know they're going to struggle with the content. And that has been the focus for a lot of our work, is trying to find those thorny pedagogical problems and use some of these emerging technologies to engage students. So let's keep going here. As we go on, we'll talk a little bit about what we can do with these technologies, but clearly immersive technologies, what we've called collectively extended reality, and we'll get more into those definitions, can take you places you couldn't go otherwise. Here we are at the Great Barrier Reef. As we proceed, we can go back in time here to the construction of the Eiffel Tower. We can take you to the surface of Mars, and we can take you into the bloodstream of the human body. In fact, during COVID and the pandemic, when we were all forced to shift rather dramatically to remote teaching, this was indeed the only way to continue to provide some of the virtual anatomy or some of the anatomy labs. And we'll talk a little bit more about this particular use case at San Diego State, but we weren't able to get students hands-on some of the artifacts that we would typically do in a physical environment. And we'll talk about how we used virtual assets to provide students with that information and the content they needed during that pandemic. So it ended up, some of the work we'd done around immersive learning earlier really served us well during the pandemic. So as we continue forward, this is the definition we use, and we're citing Jeremy Bailenson. This is somebody who you may be familiar with at Stanford University, has done some really groundbreaking research there, and has a company called Striver, which is also doing some really innovative work around the use of extended reality. Our definition is one that essentially makes it clear that we're doing things that you could not do otherwise. The term that we like to use is spatial computing. Obviously, the magic really happens relative to the instructional design. So you need to have activities to get students engaging with the content, with one another, with the instructor, and there has to be an assessment strategy. So you know whether or not you're having an impact and making a measurable difference relative to the learning outcomes. And of course, in our estimation, immersive learning involves the use of these extended reality technologies. So let's keep going. Just to kind of set the stage here in terms of the continuum, we will often refer to Milgram's early work here, and we can cite sources later, but essentially augmented reality brings anything to you, right? So you can be, as in this image here, in New York City, and you can scan over something and get more information about it. You see this being used more and more in big events. The Olympics had a lot of augmented reality for the audience that was really, I think, exciting and made things possible that wouldn't have been otherwise. So that's at one end of the continuum. Augmented reality, again, brings anything to you, right? And then in mixed reality, you've kind of got the best of both worlds. From augmented reality, it's a very rich way of overlaying content into that physical space. And you'll hear a little bit about some of the work we've done, for instance, with Microsoft and our School of Nursing using mixed reality technology. And then you've got virtual reality, which brings you anywhere. So augmented reality brings anything to you. Virtual reality brings you, again, into the blood vessel of someone, into outer space, into the bottom of the ocean, right? So that's the continuum there. And we also put 360 video in there when we think about extended reality, and the kind of term of art right now is XR. So that's just some framing that we'll do just to get us started today. So what are your questions, experiences, frustrations, and successes? I know that most of us are new to this, so feel free to riff on that given wherever you happen to be. but very curious to hear from you. And this is important for us to make sure that we're gathering data as part of our time together this morning. Or I should say this afternoon. I'm in San Diego, by the way, and it wasn't morning that long ago here, but I know for many of us, you're well into the afternoon. So questions around costs, certainly. Hardware, there's a whole smorgasbord of possibilities out there. We'll talk about that and our approach here at San Diego State, how to scale, certainly. Content is always king. So I see software there. That is certainly something that we will talk about, and our work with students in that realm.
We give people one more, maybe 15 seconds. Well, they're still coming through.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, hardware and cost, expensive, appear to be themes here.
Yep.
Yep, cost and scale, yeah. Interesting. Cool. Well, I'm happy to let you all know we will speak to each of these themes that are coming.
And I like the X API. That seems appropriate for the IMS Global Conference that we will be talking about, making it easier for content developers, like we have the Learning Technology Interoperability Framework. We certainly need to make strides, and that's something that we want to push for, and really appreciate the community banding together to make it easier for content developers to make their great assets and artifacts available through a variety of different hardware.
And we're going to transition to Andy here in one moment. I just want to let everyone know, if you have questions that come up, please feel free to ask them in the chat, and we can answer those. And thanks for participating in these interactions. All right, Andriana, on to you.
Thank you. So yes, to contextualize this even further in the work that we do at SDSU and beyond, we want to talk about the growing evidence of success in the classroom and beyond. As Dr. Frazee alluded to in the earlier slides, you can see that we have about 70 courses, 4 student organizations, and 1,000+ students involved in XR. And as you can also see, the list ranges really from a variety of disciplines and has a great large representation from all of our colleges here at SDSU. So not only can you see the representation overall, but this really is a statement of collaboration here at SDSU. So beyond coursework and the academic integration of the content, we also have great student success and engagement. It's really great to see here. So through events like hackathons, VR jams, the app development partnerships that come sort of organically out of this, so that co-curricular aspect, and then professional and career opportunities, thinking about graduate school, professional success, and internships as well. So going even further beyond that, when we're talking about the classroom, thinking about what studies, PricewaterhouseCoopers released a groundbreaking study in July 2020 with about 1,600 learners. This study focused on how virtual reality is redefining soft skills training and looked at 3 learning modalities, so classroom, e-learn, and VR. So this study showed that VR modality compared to traditional learning, traditional training, that it was 4 times faster to train, about 3 times more confident. The emotional connection was felt to learning. About 3 times more confident with skills learned, and about 4 times more emotionally connected to the content. And so that emotional connection piece will become more important later on as we talk about some of our SDSU specific projects. And just also 4 times more focused. In addition, Walmart and Striver, so as Dr. Frazee mentioned, that's a partnership out of Stanford, had a large study of about 150,000 Walmart associates. And so they studied scenarios such as Black Friday, in which learners collectively reported 30% higher satisfaction and 15% higher knowledge retention. This resulted in Walmart ultimately acquiring about 17,000 headsets with the goal of training 1 million associates. And so I think this really attests to the ability to scale. And finally, something really unique to share is in 2020, the US Department of Defense and Microsoft HoloLens announced the acquisition of over 120,000 headsets with a budget of over 20 billion for use in combat training. So in summary, the 3 studies show not only the learning and value, but just overall the rapid growth and ability to scale. So another activity here, if you go back to poll everywhere. Fact or myth, supporting use of XR requires a purpose-built space.
I'm actually so excited about my calendar.
There you go. And Dr. Hawes.
So looks like there's some consensus or agreement around that this is a myth. Here at SDSU, we are in myth camp on this one, camp myth, because I think James's introduction kind of spoiled this one maybe not, there's some disagreement coming through, because he pointed out augmented reality can bring anything to you. So XR collectively, while a purpose-built space does help to facilitate both consumption and certainly generation of the content, we feel that you can start anywhere. You don't have to have a purpose-built space on your campus or in your learning environment, and you can work with augmented reality, certainly, or mixed reality without a space.
And that said, we do have a purpose-built space here at San Diego State,
Yeah.
but
It helps.
we did not when we first got this off the ground.
Yeah.
And the next factor myth, XR technologies are very expensive. And so those connecting that back to one of our first polls, that was a concern.
It's a race.
It's always fun to see.
And we know that a lot of this is super subjective, right? But we want to use this as an opportunity to get the conversation a little bit more interactive and make this presentation more dynamic than it would be otherwise. So Sean, any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, not surprisingly, from that first slide, where both cost, expensive, et cetera, were pretty large words on the word cloud. It looks like the majority of us think that they are very expensive. As James alluded to just now, it's subjective, and we'll be talking a little bit later about nursing simulation, which is in the millions of dollars for a proper nursing simulation center, a traditional one that is. So a $2,000 headset or a $200 headset suddenly becomes very affordable. So I think it's subjective and relative, but we're in the myth camp, I think. Is that right, Andy and James?
Yep.
All right, one more, Andy.
Factor myth, creating a space capable of supporting XR tech requires professional staff. Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah, it looks like we've got consensus on this one.
Yeah, you can't tell if only one person responded or there's just no disagreement.
No, I think we would absolutely agree with this. I mean, you don't have to have people dedicated. In other words, here at San Diego State, there's no person on this campus, as far as I know, whose job is specifically extended reality. This is something that our folks do as part of their other work. whether they're in our learning environments unit or our instructional design unit or in our academic media team or, for instance, in Sean's leadership role. But it certainly does, in our estimation, require professional staff to be able to get faculty and students the help they need to be successful. So Sean, Andriana, anything you'd add to that?
I agree. It helps.
Mhm.
And I think the students are becoming more and more accustomed to this type of development work as well, especially in computer science and computer engineering. But having the staff that can help on the back end really helps as well, especially in the production of this content.
Yeah, and we'll talk more about our relationships with the students as we go on here, but that's certainly been part of our secret sauce at San Diego State.
So speaking of production and alluding back to James's comment about bringing students into the anatomy lab during the pandemic, we had a project that, and this is, we're calling our virtual immersive teaching and learning open resource library, or VITaL open resource library. So we had a project that started pre-pandemic with some of the drivers being health barriers to anatomy resources. So formaldehyde preserved content, and formaldehyde, as you can see from the bottle here, is a poison. It does have negative consequences for I think all humans, but certainly people like pregnant women, people with sensitivities and allergies, et cetera, cannot use formaldehyde. That was the case in our biology department with an instructor who, over 20 years of teaching with anatomy, developed a sensitivity to formaldehyde and couldn't be in the lab anymore. Came to us and we developed a solution for her, which became relevant to everyone. So relevant to online hybrid remote students and learners immediately, but to everyone during COVID, where we had over 4,000 interactions with the 3D models that we created. Existing lab platforms like the hip bone rotating on the right-hand side are expensive, so it requires students to purchase app subscriptions very often out of their own pocket. It's lacking photorealism, so you can see it's kind of a computer-generated model, and it's not quite photorealistic, including the shapes and also the colors and textures. And it's difficult to customize, so it's often a pre-packaged app that does not allow for customization by the instructor. So I'm going to show a short video showing Professor Sandy Garver and her story and how we addressed that. So here we go. Here you can see us taking photos of bones.
A lot of labs were really
Let Sandy
struggling
talk.
with how they were going to give the same experience. It has made my life a lot easier in turning the lab into a virtual setting.
So you can see here, using those 2D photos, we were able to use a process called Photogrammetry to make 3D models that were consumable across devices. So using a computer, a tablet, a phone,
So
headsets,
short
et
of
cetera.
holding the organ in your hand, you're still seeing it, you're able to rotate it around, you're able to do things like tag it or label it. And that provides that learning environment for the student, as well as having the tool in their own home to be able to look at that. Having that three-dimensional option really seemed to help them out. I think that the use for it is tremendous, and I would love to be able to have our own virtual library that was based out of San Diego State.
So that was recorded during the pandemic. And as you can see, she was on Zoom speaking to some of our colleagues. And since then, we've actually embarked on that. So we found that this is relevant, again, beyond the pandemic, certainly for those use cases we discussed. One of Sandy's colleagues, Yuvia Flores, pictured here on the left-hand side and the right-hand side, found a need in botany, where she often takes students down to Baja California, which is, the border is about 30 minutes south of us, but not all students can go. Some don't have the correct paperwork to cross the border. Others have accessibility issues. They're in a wheelchair, for example, and cannot ride a horse like these other students, et cetera. So we're working with with Uvia and other colleagues to develop models beyond just bones. So again, these are developed just using 2D images stitched together, and it's a free resource that's available for our students, and we're making that available to all students across the California State University system, the largest system in the United States with almost 500,000 students. So here is a screenshot here of our open resource library. We're currently hosting this in Sketchfab, which is an online repository, but we're working on building our own repository to make the content more adaptable. So again, 23 campuses within the CSU. We want to make this available beyond the CSU to all campuses. And some of that interoperability that James alluded to may be helpful there. It's device agnostic, interactive, and customizable. And the students, as we know, think it's cool. So our next steps is to expand beyond biology and assess the student performance using these tools. I'll also mention on the right-hand side here, you can see this was featured in the most recent EDUCAUSE Horizon report in the open educational resources section. So open being free and adaptable. All right, back to James.
Yeah, and it's funny, we were talking about this before we got started here. The groundskeeper, we're back on campus, Sean, Andriana, and myself, and the groundskeeper is literally cutting a tree down right outside of my window right now. Hopefully that ambient noise isn't too distracting.
Ani in real life.
Coming through. Yeah, you're fine.
So yeah, the empathy lens is one of the really, I think, super exciting initiatives that we have underway as part of the VITaL research laboratory and center that we referenced earlier. Again, virtual immersive teaching and learning. And the empathy lens in this case is all about gaining insights and giving learners the opportunity to have a broad perspective. So let's keep going here through this deck. I want to share a short video right now just to kind of set the stage for this particular use case.
In an era ripe with distrust and misunderstanding, empathy can be difficult to achieve. While some individuals have the best intentions, racial, gender, religious, and other biases are often evidenced in our daily interactions. But what if we can step into the eyes of another person?
Understanding what is their lived experience, how are they engaging this world, how are they being perceived by others, and we haven't really had a good way of doing that until now.
The empathy lens is really a concept and a technology for reversing years of conditioning that people might have without even realizing it. The idea of the empathy lens is to go beyond diversity training, to really give people experiences that allow them to get a sense of what other people perceive in terms of their actions. Traditional diversity training asks people to be respectful and to value the perspectives of other people, but it doesn't put them into the shoes of those other people.
The research has been unequivocal that if we're going to change dispositions around issues of race and discrimination, the only way that that can truly occur, the only way we can truly address issues of bias is by taking the perspective of somebody else.
Through this virtual reality simulation, the participants will be able to be inside the head of another person and hear that self-talk, not only of people that look differently, talk differently, have different norms of behavior, but they'll also be able to have opportunities to reflect on that. We really think now, more than ever, is the right time for the empathy lens.
It's a research-based strategy that's informed by cutting-edge technology and by the best minds at San Diego State.
Yeah, so here's some images of some of the content development here with the empathy lens. You see on the left-hand side, we did a casting call involving students from our theater, television, and film school who are doing their auditions and recording themselves. On the right-hand side, this is the actual production process using a very sophisticated, what's the model of that camera again, Sean?
InstaPro 362 is the model.
Okay.
We can put it into the chat too.
Looks like a little robot there on the table. We actually learned about this, and this is why partnerships with other institutions and organizations are so important. We've had a long-standing relationship with North Carolina State University and some colleagues at NC State. Shout out to Mike Qualls and his team that are part of the Delta initiative at NC State. Showed us this camera, and we got so excited about it. We used that as part of our production process. You know, one of the things about 360 video is that it's relatively affordable in terms of the realm of possibilities today relative to generating immersive content. So we use that. As we go forward here in the presentation, we'll show you a little example. Sean, if you don't mind queuing that up, just so that people can experience what that feels like.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining our meeting today.
Of course. Hello.
The purpose of this meeting is to observe data patterns around the Math Common Formative Assessment, CFA. Each of you has a folder with the team's data that has been disaggregated based on subgroups of race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, English learners, gender, and students with disabilities. We'll be following our usual protocol to analyze the data and come up with an action plan for next steps.
These kids aren't learning anything we're teaching. We are working way too hard with no return. They don't have the skills needed, and we observed that on the last data analysis. They never do their homework or their assignments, and their parents don't value education. I am just fed up, and I don't see the purpose of having this little meeting. This is a waste of my time.
So I'll mention real quick before we jump ahead that a student would be able to interact with this on a computer like I am here, built within their learning management system like Canvas via a tool called PlayPosit, or within a VR app. So it's device agnostic content. So if we jump ahead, you'll see the inner thoughts of the different participants. So we'll start with just one example to show you.
I am just fed up, and I don't see the purpose of having these little meetings. I am done.
Mr. Glenn is kind of making this meeting a little awkward already. I know this is only my first year as a teacher, but I feel like I have a lot of new insights to offer here, particularly to some of our more experienced teachers. As a person who recognizes my own privilege, I know I need to do my best to uplift the experiences of all student subgroups, while also promoting equity in the classroom. I guess it's up to me to say something first. I think this process is very valuable and helpful in analyzing root causes to identify next steps.
Yeah, so you just got a taste of that, but we're also working on a faculty hiring committee scenario where you get to experience what it's like to be, for instance, the department chair who's chairing that search committee, to being the candidate for the position, what that interaction feels like, with some different opportunities for interaction along the way that make it much more dynamic than more conventional diversity, equity, and inclusion training. So you see some journals here. That's really an important part of this work. All of our work, indeed, around the VITaL initiative is the scholarship of teaching and learning and sharing our findings with the community. So in the interest of time, let's keep going here. We've got some other exciting use cases to share. But before we do, we have a question for the audience. Go ahead, Andrea, sorry.
What is a scenario that might benefit from an empathy lens simulation?
So the key component here is perspective taking. So what would help to build empathy among learners, participants, staff, et cetera, by taking someone else's perspective.
interaction, teaching, addressing ability awareness.
Certainly interaction with law enforcement,
Yeah.
seeing both the perspective of the person who's, on the receiving end of that service, as well as being in the police perspective as well. Disability is coming up multiple times. There's actually an example of an app called, or a platform called Embodied Labs, in which you can see what it's like to have things like macular degeneration and how that impacts your life, such that you can empathize with the person who perhaps you're caring for, to see what it's like for them. So
And
awesome
bullying
ideas.
just popped up as well. You can think
Oh,
about
yeah.
K through 12.
And also what's going through the head of the bully, what's driving that interaction that needs to be addressed, rather than just demonizing that person.
Yeah, I think in the interest of time, we should keep going.
Awesome ideas, though. Thank you, everyone, for sharing. Oh, they're still coming. We'll keep them coming. We'll definitely review this later, and really appreciate your insight there. All right, so the last example we're going to talk about here is a collaboration that you can see was broadly multi-institutional, as well as represented public partnerships with Microsoft and Pearson. So this was a partnership in which we developed a virtual standardized patient. So on the left, you can see a patient actor, and I'll get into some details on that. And on the right, you can see what the virtual hologram of that looks like, and how we can use mixed reality using the Microsoft HoloLens to embed that holographic video right within the clinical setting here at San Diego State. So this is driven by a number of challenges. One challenge is that in order to meet the 800 clinical hours that are required by the Board of Nursing, the instructors are required to provide real-world experiences, but currently it's very challenging to provide enough of those, specifically 800 clinical hours across the program. So in order to bridge the gap from the lecture to the simulation lab and practice to the real world, which is the whole idea here, which is even more important now than ever due to nursing shortages across the country and around the world, especially here in Southern California, more simulation is needed. So that leads to challenge number 2, that not all simulation is created equally, and the cost is reflective of this. So low fidelity simulation, so think about that CPR mannequin that you've likely interacted with at some point in your life as an educator. That falls into the low fidelity camp. It's often plastic mannequins without any kind of computerization or any kind of feedback. So it's valuable for some things, like you can see here, using tubing in an airway, things like that, but there's no reaction of the mannequin. On the high fidelity simulation end, you have an entire simulation lab. So each one of the mannequins that are computerized, that can actually talk, quote unquote, back to the learner and have some reactions and some kind of motorized haptic feedback, things like that. Each one of those mannequins ranges from 10,000 to 200,000, and the simulation labs are in the millions of dollars. And then finally, kind of the gold standard for a variety of reasons is standardized patient actors. So these are human actors at $20 to $40 per hour. And this is probably inflated now that, the current situation that we're in. This requires one-on-one interaction between each learner and the standardized patient actor, and standardized patients aren't capable of delivering some of the more realistic, dynamic interactions that need to happen, which we'll get to in challenge 3. So bottom line is not all schools can afford the current best practice, which is high fidelity and standardized patients. And that's particularly true at San Diego State, where we have a campus in Imperial Valley about 100 miles east of us that does not have a simulation lab. Whereas here on the Mesa campus here in San Diego, we have a multi-million-dollar simulation lab. So want to make sure there's equity between the different campuses and universities around the world. And then finally, the third challenge, which I alluded to, is that neither standardized patients or the different mannequins, high fidelity or low fidelity, can be as dynamic as a simulation can. So for example, if you remember this Will Smith movie Hitch, where he develops an anaphylactic reaction and he's swelling up, et cetera. And actually this more accurate kind of medical description here on the right with hives and itching and redness, things like that. With a live actor, they cannot have dynamic interactions as we can create in holographic video. So our approach here was to create a virtual standardized patient using a professional actor, and we partnered with Microsoft in this regard up at their headquarters in Redmond, Washington, near Seattle, and over 125 camera array pointed in all different directions, 100 of which were, actually 25 of which were infrared. We were able to develop this holographic video with vital signs overlaid and other information overlaid for the nursing student to practice with in this safe environment in order to become familiar with what this allergic anaphylactic shock looks like in real life, so they can intervene and call the right code if and when they experience that in real life. So to go back to those challenges, we determined through this research that it is realistic, safe, and compared with more traditional modalities, and importantly, increased motivation to learn, particularly in the areas of attention, which you can imagine having a headset over your eyes, and satisfaction. And both of these are rooted in John Keller's ARCS model of student motivation to learn. And then the other two challenges, we did determine through our literature review that it is less expensive compared with those other modalities, and it's more portable. And especially now in the age of COVID and increasing telemedicine, the rural and remote locations can benefit from this greatly. And also it provides the more realism with the maquillage or the makeup provided for those professional actors, and it is a truly standardized experience across learners. So that is the nursing example that we have here, and I'll toss it back to James.
And I know we're coming on time, so just some things looking forward. We've recently gone through a major strategic planning process with a new president who arrived a couple of years ago. Now that plan is in place. One of the guiding principles is We Are SDSU, which essentially means building a more interconnected campus. So as Sean mentioned, we have a campus in the rural Imperial Valley, which is an agriculturally intense area 110 miles east of here. We also have a global campus, and we have a campus in Georgia, not the state of Georgia, mind you, the Republic of Georgia. And we're part of a larger 23 campus California State University system that serves every year 500,000 learners. Indeed, it is the largest system of higher education in the nation. So we're part of this large community, and we're trying to connect to those campuses through this work. So as we move forward, you see here the plan for Mission Valley. There was this football team called the San Diego Chargers. You might know now they're Los Angeles Chargers. We're really happy about them leaving for Los Angeles, and that's because San Diego State acquired 160 acres of prime real estate right in the heart of the city of San Diego in a part of town called Mission Valley. And that is where we're building a research innovation park and center. It's also going to allow us to dramatically expand our student body by another 10,000 students. As I mentioned earlier, we're at 36,000 students now, so that's going to grow. And part of that is going to involve a immersive learning content creation capability, where we're going to be engaging with public and private partners to do immersive learning content creation with our students. And this is funded, the We Rise, Redefy as part of that strategic plan. And this work we're doing in the research center that I mentioned earlier, the VITaL Research Center, is part of a big idea grant from our president's office. So just a little bit on that. And we also have, and I'm going to close on this, we also have a new BSN starting. Go ahead, Sean, you take it from here.
Sure, we got our James's phone's blowing up there. We are in the fall of 22, so a year from now. The Imperial Valley campus is planning a new Bachelor of Science in Nursing program. And again, as we alluded to, in order to make that happen, we will either need to build multi-million-dollar simulation centers or rely on some of this new technology to do so in what we think could be a more effective and more affordable manner, and also set a precedent for telehealth and telemedicine, as well as interprofessional simulation, so collaborating with other disciplines, including computer science, including computer engineering, et cetera, to provide opportunities for collaboration.
That's a lot. We want to go ahead and just thank everyone. I know we're right at time. You have our email addresses here on this slide. I know, Andrea, that this recording is going to be made available for the audience. We can go back and review, and we're happy to be a resource to you all and look forward to what the future might hold for us.
Must be a really important phone call for James. Andrea, thank you. Oh, I think you're muted. Yep.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you to the panelists. This is just fabulous. I am so tickled with what you are all doing. It's really impressive. I'd like to maybe perhaps reach out outside of this to talk to you about a couple of other things, but this is just fabulous work. And I just want to thank you all for sharing your expertise today and the great work that you're doing. I know a lot of the folks on the call today were really impressed, I'm sure. And thank you to the attendees for attending. I really appreciate your time today, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much, and love to connect, Andrea, if you'd like, or anyone else.
Yeah,
Great.
thank you. Great job,
I'll be
team.
reaching out. Great job. Thank you.
All right,
Have
bye-bye.
a great week, everyone.
You too.